Hello, new product review today. Well, new product-ish. It is from BetaFPV and it's called the LiteRadio 3. Now you may have heard me mention this before, and that's because BetaFPV sent out a pre-release version which looks like this. I did a review in it, I was ready to go ahead and publish it, and they're like, no, don't. We haven't finished it yet, we're going to make some alterations. So they've finished it and they've sent me a new one. However, I do note that the original one they sent me was for ExpressLRS. This one is back to a FrSky radio. They've been doing these for a while now. We had the original BetaFPV LiteRadio, and that had a sort of external LiPo in the back. My one died. Then they had the LiteRadio 2 SE, which was better. It's got a built-in battery. I've upgraded this one with the ExpressLRS board. There's a video about that one. And now they're up to the 3. So obviously I'm expecting great differences between these two physically, even though, you know, one's FrSky and one's ExpressLRS. So in the exciting box there's a lot of plastic packaging. There's something about getting support, an instruction guide, and the radio itself, which is got these gimbal protectors, which is, there you go, there's a difference. Look, the one I had before had a join in that, and now they don't. Other than that though, the only difference is they've put some printing on it. Now, when I was reviewing this one, I had awful problems upgrading the firmware because I wasn't sure how to get it into the right mode. And it turned out to be this button that you had to press in whilst powering on, which wasn't obvious because there was nothing written on it. On these ones, look, they've got writing on them, and they've got writing on the switches here. But that's kind of the big difference, these switches. These are freeway rocker switches here and here, and these are sort of the in and out style switches. Saw this one on the TBS Mambo, and I have to say, having a 2-position switch for arming like that I quite liked, because sometimes I could hit the wrong switch if I'm coming in and out of different modes, but when it's a press-in one like that, it's pretty obvious because it's kind of flat, and this one's obviously contoured so you know what's going on. These I like. I'm still not so sure about this one. It's kind of, it can be slightly difficult to find the centre or instantly where you are, but yeah, not bad. And the gimbals were pretty good in the one I tried. Another big difference about this one is it's all been a little bit different. On the original they were using a fork of OpenTX, and they had their own special configurator that you had to try and use to do some of the setup, and it was really messy. And then on the next one they were using something else, and it was all about doing certain stick movements to calibrate and stuff like that. Since I upgraded that, and since you got the 3, you've got this thing called the BetaFPV configurator, which is a lot better, although there's some caveats to that, and I'll come to that when we get onto it. But yeah, aside from that, and because they sent me a few other bits, I will show you them to you. You can get some neck straps if you want. This one's quite stiff and heavy, this one's a bit lighter, and it says ExpressLRS on it. You can also get this nifty bag, and the radio fits in very nicely. It's got some spaces there, it's got some spaces there. These are available. But anyway, let's jump onto the configurator using this new version of the radio, because I basically show these in parallel because they're essentially the same thing, just this one's running ExpressLRS, this one is running a FrSky. Basically you combine two D8, D16 and something else, I can't remember which isn't FrSky. But there's going to be differences in the configurator because obviously there's some ELRS set up here. But I quite like the way you can change things like how the stick extents and the centering works, and how you can change the channel order of what switches do what. But let's jump in the configurator and I'll show you that. Okay, well here we are in the BetaFPV configurator. You'll notice it is in release candidate at the moment. Check to see what the latest is. This has been the latest for a while. And confusingly, it always starts up in a flight controller thing. So the first thing you need to do is click here to activate configurator for radio transmitter. As soon as you get that, get your radio, plug it in. You notice you don't have to power it on, just plug it in, and then click on connect RC, and you'll see here if we move the sticks we're connected in. And there's a lot to like about this configurator. I really do think it's a vast improvement of what they had before, and it makes things a little bit easy. So you can change the mode you're in. Obviously you'll need to change your physical sticks as well if you were doing that. You've got the option to use the internal external RF module. Let's talk about the internal for now, and you can set it up here as FrSky D8, which many whoops use, or you've got the LPT or FCC D16, and there's the one I couldn't remember. It also speaks for Taba SFHSS. And the one thing you have to remember when looking at this for firmware flashing, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, is the internal chip it's got, or the internal radio module, which is the CC2500, which is one of the chips that you'd have on the 4-in-1 module, this just being one of the 4. And from here, you know, you can obviously do things like check your sticks work, check your buttons work and everything like that. This all looks good. You can change the scale and the offset, so in case you've got any sort of problem, or you want to manually say, actually I only want, for example, let's say 50% of my throttle, and it goes like that. Oh, interestingly, it puts it in the middle rather than having one end or the other. But I suppose you'd then change that with the offset, so we'd change that down to minus whatever. Anyway, you get the idea. We can sort those out in such a way. And one thing I often did was change the switch. I mean, I always had this as channel 5 for arming, and then I'd have channel 6 here, channel 7 here, and channel 8 there. So you see, if I want 6 to be here, it's currently in the wrong position. So all I can do is, if I change that to SC and change this one to SB, like that, and then that sorted that bit. Switches are correct. And to change your save your changes, just do a save and reboot, and it tells me the radio is disconnected because it's just been rebooted, which makes sense. Now, as far as the firmware version goes, there are certain things you can do in this radio that are available on the latest firmware. So here's a good time to talk about firmware versions. It doesn't say what the latest is, but I just checked it and I happen to know it's later. So let's talk about how we would do that. First off, we'd do a disconnect. Unplug your radio, go to the firmware flasher. Then what we need to do is turn on the radio whilst holding in the setup button here. So it's literally just find something, press it in, it turns on really quickly, then plug in the radio. At this point, it will give you a serial port. So in this case, it's that weird number there for me. And what I want to do is select the right radio, and this is where you need to know your chip. And this is the LiteRadio 3 on the CC2500 chip, like that. And I remember we were on 101, we've got up to 201 for the firmware. It would be nice if it had sort of some bits and pieces about what that firmware actually had, but it doesn't. It says firmware is loaded successfully, so let's go ahead and flash that firmware now. So connect, and then flash the firmware. Programming is successful. Okay, then what we need to do, unplug, turn it off, plug it back in without doing anything with power, and then we go to welcome, and then we go to connect RC, and we should see that now our firmware version is 201. Hooray! And the other setting we've got because of that 201 is here with the buzzer switch and the joystick dead zone. That's the new thing you can set. As described, there is a module bay here for the sort of nano type modules. For example, something like this 868 ExpressLRS. And to use that, you would turn the internal module off, turn the external RF module to on, and then you'd pick your external protocol, which is a choice of CRSF or CRSF. Obviously, if we did that, we wouldn't have any control over any of the aspects of this. So if you're going to do this, you'd need the model set up, or you'd need to have an OLED in the back or something where you can do stuff. There's not a lot you can do from here, just the fact you can turn it on or off. I'm going to turn this back off for now and turn the internal module to on. But while we're here, let's also talk about the ExpressLRS version of this. Let's just disconnect this. Here's my ExpressLRS version, which looks almost exactly the same, but if I plug that in and connect to RC, we will see that it is running the SX1280, which is basically the ExpressLRS chip. And I've already done some stuff in here, so I updated this from the original firmware. This is currently on firmware 2.01. And we've got the bind phrase, and from here we can change the power and the packet rate. This supports 500 Hz, so I thought I'd actually use it. And in this one, I've gone ahead and I've reversed these channels, I noticed. So channel 5 was active unless I pressed it. So I've reversed those round, and I've changed around SC and SB. Once again, you can use the external RF module, same things apply there, and if you do that, okay, so turn that off, turn that on, you've got an option of CRSF or CRSF, so it's literally just if you're using Crossfire or ExpressLRS in the back of those. And if we wanted to flash to firmware, we'd do it in the same way, hold button, power on, plug in. We then get a serial device, go to firmware flasher, connect, choose the LiteRadio free SX1280, and this is where we've got a bit of a disconnect. You'll see here that we've got version 2.01. If I was to fire up my ExpressLRS configurator, which I will do, you'll notice that the current release of ExpressLRS is 2.20. 2.01 was a little while ago because, the releases come thick and fast. So whilst this is actually a pretty friendly way of being able to flash the radio, literally you just say load the firmware, and then you'd say flash to firmware, and it would just go ahead and do it. It's always going to lag behind a bit because this is like a pre-compiled binary that BetaFPV are putting on their Git site, and then this populates from that website. That means it's always going to lag behind. So this is a little bit behind. On the good news, as far as ExpressLRS goes, it's very good about having major versions. So if you've got something on version 2, as long as that major version is version 2, then something else on 2.1 or 2.2 or whatever can still talk to it. But if there's one thing I did like about this, it's the fact you can go ahead and change your bind phrase, or just use your bind phrase without updating the firmware and then saving and rebooting that. This is actually quite nice and a little bit more friendly than ExpressLRS does it through their configurator, where you always have to flash the firmware. Of course, if you can't get around it on receivers because you can't sort of just connect to them in one way, but perhaps you should be able to. Why can't you just connect to Wi-Fi and just change this bit? That would be quite nice. So the actual tool itself, I think, is pretty nice. It does a lot. You can change a lot of things, and it doesn't involve pressing silly buttons to make things change in that. So yeah, a good thing. All it needs to do is be a little bit more up to date as far as ExpressLRS goes, so you can have always the latest firmware version that ExpressLRS have, or maybe just like a week behind or something wouldn't be so bad. So in the past, I've always been keen on range testing these things, and I used the original LiteRadio 3 with ExpressLRS, and we got a failsafe at around 600 and something meters. But really, if you're flying longer range, or you're out with expensive quads and really going in sort of high intensity flying or slightly dodgier areas, then you want a more full function radio than this. So I thought what I would do is really fly the typical scenario, and for this FrSky based one, that is really about, hey, I've got a little SPI receiver in this one, and I should fly it around the house. That's about perfect for it. Of course, if you got an external FrSky receiver, this would be fine with it, but I wouldn't go more than 300-400 yards, so field flying and stuff, absolutely fine. Everything else, get a better, more full-functioned radio for it. And all you have to do is bind this thing. You put this little guy in bind, which I've already done. You turn this on and you press the bind button and it flashes and they bind together. Easy as that. Let's try flying it. Okay, so we're off and flying, and straight away I notice, I'm not very good at this, and yeah, I'm a little bit out of practice with toothpicks, but I actually thought I picked up a little sort of quite gentle e-sheen thing, but it's the Modulus 6, which is a little bit more powerful and is going to need sort of 3 or 4 lipos just to get the hang of it again. But I think you get the idea. On a little whoop like this, we can zip it about the house quite happily and have a good old time. And similarly, if you were sort of in a larger open area, this would be absolutely fine and happy to race in. Now, if there was a problem, it would be the combination of this radio with little SPI receivers that sort of inhabit this type of whoop. And the problem was, I hit several problems where I just lost signal. So I'd just be flying along quite happily, minding my own business, and suddenly we'd get an RX loss and we're on the floor. And what I had to do is basically try moving my hand position, holding the radio up in a better position to try and give it a signal to get off the ground again. But yeah, it certainly happened more than once and was a bit of a pain. So you saw there that little quad kept falling down. Now, this is a reasonably tricky space for a little SPI receiver, because we're going down some stairs, through concrete walls and stuff. However, normally stuff's fine. So what's going on? If I check the power of this, it's rated at 100 milliwatts, which is absolutely fine for a regular 2.4 system. So if it's not that, I have to think it's the antenna. And what I mean by that is there is in here a little internal, it's actually a T antenna. I opened it up to have a look. It's like a little sort of dipole thing. And what happens when I'm flying in a chair is I just rest this on my knees, and it means that the angle is down like this. So if our antennas come in here, the big radiation pattern is basically going up and down. So really we'd need to be flying like this, which of course nobody does, because that looks ridiculous and it's not very comfortable. When we're on a sort of regular radio like this, even if you had it sort of sat in your lap, what you could do is simply put the antenna up and put it at the correct angle, so it's always pointing up no matter where your arms are resting it. Let's try that theory out. Let's have a quick fly on this one, take it downstairs where it had the failsafe, and see what sort of signal we get by poking our antenna at the right level. Okay, so as you can see, we have the Tyrannus, we have the antenna poking at about the level it should be for where I'm holding the radio, and yeah, let's get flying. You can see, if you see a slight continuity of my t-shirt changing, it's a different day, and I wanted to come back and look at this, and let's find out how it does. Now, I immediately noticed that the RSSI was slightly higher. It was always dipping into the 30s when I was flying on the BetaFPV radio. It's more often in the 40s on the Tyrannus. It certainly dips into the 30s because, let's face it, these little SPI D8 receivers are horrible. But yeah, it's definitely higher. There's a better signal. I went back and forth over this same area, up high, up low, different speeds, and I could not get it to fail safe. And that kind of makes sense, because I always used to sort of fly out through the conservatory into the garden, round the back, quite happily when I was testing out these little whoops. And yeah, this is perfectly happy on this radio. As far as the ExpressLRS version of this goes, it opens up a bit more because the range increases. But I think the sweet spot is, again, the smaller stuff. The whoops, indoors or outdoors, and of course the slightly bigger toothpicks or outdoor whoops, which are great for going around things like trees, which we've got around me here. However, something went very wrong. I took off, and then when I was moving the roll and pitch stick, something just wasn't responding there. It was sort of intermittent, or it would suddenly snap over one side or the other, and this basically involved me sort of rebooting the radio, rebooting the quad, trying it out, trying to line of sight hover, and finally ending up upside down underwater in a big dirty puddle. So I got home, plugged it back into the configurator and looked for the problem, and the left stick seemed absolutely fine. But on the right stick, which is what I was having problems with, you can see that the control
or the signal we're getting from the stick is all over the place. Sometimes it jumps around. Other times you'll move the stick all the way over and it just won't respond, and then suddenly will. I talked to BetaFPV about this, and they wanted to know if it was a gimbal problem or a board problem, and asked me to swap them around. And long story short, I ended up disassembling it, plugging it in, and it was working, and then I reassembled it and it was all fine. So it could have just been slightly loose or dodgy from the factory. But let's try the flight again. So I guess I'm putting that problem down to slightly loose fitting from the factory, although it didn't see anything. But I have lost a gimbal on a radio before, and the very first LiteRadio literally was shaking because bits had come loose in it. So just watch out for that. This is actually the third attempt of me flying. The initial intro was from the second one, because on the very first time I got there, I found that I didn't have my PowerPlay DVR in my bag, and I used that to power my goggles as well as recording DVR. And I was like, this is an hour's round trip walking. And then when I got home, I found it was in my bag, which was even more annoying. Obviously, the second trip, we ended up in the puddle. This is the third trip. So this is about 4 hours for 2 minutes of footage, just so I can say, yeah, this suits an outside whoop or something like a toothpick quite nicely. ExpressLRS gives a really nice signal. I'm flying here at 500 Hertz, and it just feels like the right sort of stuff for this radio. Much preferring the ExpressLRS version of this radio to the FrSky one, if that wasn't obvious already.
A couple of little facts about the battery in this radio. They've upgraded this. Previously, the 2SE was using a 1000 mAh 1S battery. This has got a 2000 mAh 1S battery, and you plug it in and it charges, and should it get low on battery while you're flying, it fades in and out blue and starts beeping at you, which is quite handy. But they reckon this will give you about 15 hours of battery life on a fully charged battery, which is quite a lot. Whether that's the case, I don't know, because I haven't stayed out in the field that long, but it seems fine just on a sort of general day's flying.
As far as using this for a sim go, it should be pretty easy. You take your USB-C connector, plug it in. Again, you don't need to power it on. It should be detected by whatever sim you're using. Obviously, I'm using my one, and sticks work and switches generally work fine. And from that point of view, you're up and flying. Feels pretty good. Feels really easy. And for me, only because sometimes I'm programming this and I spend a lot of time with this plugged in, it's quite nice that A, I don't have to think about the battery, and B, if I do just leave it plugged in like this and don't touch the sticks, it doesn't start whining at me after 10 minutes that no one's touched it and it's just sat there doing nothing. I can't remember what the alert is for that, but it's an annoying voice that goes on and on and on. Well, what do we think about the LiteRadio 3? And the answer is it's okay under the correct circumstances, and those circumstances are using a model it's fit for. So in terms of the FrSky stuff, I would not take a proper 5-inch quad with expensive bits on it outside of like flying in a sort of park or field, because I just don't think it's up to the job in terms of the signal you're going to get. So I really do think this is a whoop radio, and this is absolutely fine for a whoop. Bundle it with the whoop, sell it as a pack with cheapo goggles, and it's good. That said, it doesn't have a particularly good signal if you're going to go through the house, downstairs and further. You really want to be on the same floor in an open environment, else you're not going to get a great experience. That's if you're using an SPI receiver. If you're using a proper D8, D16 receiver, obviously you'll be able to go a lot further. But as I said, I still wouldn't go beyond a field with this one. As far as ExpressLRS one goes, which is my favourite because A, you can run it up to 500 Hertz, and B, the range is significantly better. You can do a lot more with it. That said, I still wouldn't put my big expensive quads on this one and take them beyond a field. I think it's great for whooping. I think it's great for taking toothpicks out through the woods and stuff like that. I would, maybe fly on a 3-inch or a 5-inch in sort of close in within that field, within that park, but I would not take it any further. For that, I would take a proper radio and a proper module, because you just want that much stronger, more powerful and more robust signal. One positive that BetaFPV can be cheered for is their configurator, which is actually really nice. It's really easy to set this up. It's really easy to flash firmware. The only downside is that the official ExpressLRS firmware lags behind what they have available. As far as the external module bay goes, it's nice to have, but honestly, if you are putting an external ExpressLRS module on or something else, really you want access to a Lua script to control it. You need a screen, you need a more full functioned radio for that sort of thing. So good for what they could do, as long as you know the limitations of what you've got there. Well, this has been the review of the BetaFPV LiteRadio Free, 2 flavours of it, and of course there'll be links down below where you can check it in more detail. Hope that review's been helpful, and in the meantime I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.